Henry Ford once said, "Whether you think you can or you cannot, you are right." Embracing the spirit of these words, some visionaries came together to think about one such whether they can, and guess what? They were right. This is how the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research became a successful reality.
Good morning, everyone present over here. I am Sarupa Roy, and this is Bhavakshi Punya, and we feel immense pleasure to welcome you all on the auspicious day of 12th Foundation Day of IISER Pune.
Foundation Day is the time to reflect on the beginnings that took place and since the inception, how changes have paved way for our success. I would like to invite our director, Professor Jayant Udgaonkar, to deliver the report to enlighten us about all the progress that has been taken place over the past few years.
Please, sir.
So let me begin by welcoming you to this function. It's after 3 years that we're having a physical meeting here in this hall for Foundation Day. And it's wonderful to see a crowd of people together in IISER. It's been a difficult 2-year period for the Institute during the pandemic. And it's been difficult especially for students. It's also been difficult for faculty and other staff working at the Institute. And it required, I think, a lot of hard work on many people's part to keep the Institute running, from admin, from engineering, from housekeeping to canteen staff during the past 2 years. So what I would like to begin with is a slide where I acknowledge the efforts of our COVID task force during this past 2.5 years. So there's a committee which was appointed to keep our campus safe, and Harinath Chakrapani bore the brunt of the responsibility for a major part of the pandemic. When you have a committee of many people, it's inevitable that the chairperson of the committee has to bear the brunt of the work and the brunt of the complaints coming from many people. And Hari and now later Shiva really have done a marvelous job in getting things done. Of course, the rest of the committee contributed very well to the decisions that the task force finally came up with. And I think the fact that we managed to control infections on campus during this 2-year period was because of the recommendations of the task force over the last 2 years. So I thank them all. I've put Shrabanti's name separate because Shrabanti did some real hard work. And that real hard work was organizing the return of the students to the campus. She had to deal with lots of complaints from many, many students. And she did a real great job in, where is she? In getting students back. And the last batch of students, I think, will be on campus. The first year BSMS students will be back on campus, well, not back, will be on campus for the first time within 6-7 days, I believe. So thank you, Shabanti, for all that you've done. But I thank all of these people for really keeping our campus safe and organizing things on campus with respect to the pandemic over the past 2 months. So, of course, there were other activities which took place during the pandemic. The Institute set up a testing center. This was done, a lot of the organization was done by Anjan Banerjee. There was a large group of volunteers who participated in the testing center, and from all departments, I believe. And because of this volunteer group, we, over a period of many months, ended up doing more than 50,000 samples. So I thank all the volunteers. Some of them who really spent much more time at the testing center than others will be felicitated later today. With the help of the municipal corporation, we established a vaccination center on campus, and that facilitated vaccination of faculty members, campus residents, including students, over many months. And we thank the PMC as well as the staff, our medical staff, for getting this vaccination center functional. Our faculty members have contributed to genome sequencing efforts over the past many months. This is a very important activity given how strains are changing. And at IISER itself, more than 10,000 genomes, virus genomes, have been sequenced. And of course, there are faculty members who have done research connected with COVID, including, for example, the design and construction of ventilators, and of course, research on the virus itself, which I've talked about or has been talked about on other occasions, so I won't really talk about it today. Coming back to IISER, we have had 6 departments until last year: for biology, chemistry, earth science, humanities, mathematics, and physics. In the past year or so, a little more than a year perhaps, we have established 2 new departments: data science, which has taken off with 2 faculty members at present, and another who hopefully will join in a few months' time. Science education, the department has been established. Has Bapat is the coordinator for hiring faculty out there. And we hope once the government approves more faculty positions, that we will be able to get faculty members for these 2 new departments, and of course the older departments. So we have had several new faculty members join in the past 3 years. These are listed here. So it's great to welcome all these new faculty members, and I hope they all do very well at the Institute in the coming years. Many of them, I think many of you would have met, but they're all listed out here. So if you look at IISER today, we have 136 faculty members. Another 3 have been offered faculty positions at the Institute and have yet to join. We have now nearly 1,800 students, including BSMS and PhD students. We have a staff of 130 or so. This does not include, of course, our contractual staff. We have visiting and emeritus faculty members, postdoctoral fellows, as listed out here. And now we have graduated more than 1,500 students in the past 15, 16 years. So despite the pandemic, the Institute has been productive scientifically. There's been a very respectable large number of publications which have come out in journals. And so, as you can see, the total is 552, which is, it has not declined, it is going up every year. Patents numbers have also gone up, as you can see, and now we have a respectable number of patents granted, and I hope this number will keep increasing in the years to come. The funding to the Institute comes mainly from sponsored projects now, as we've gotten out of the project mode, and there have been more than 50 grants awarded to IISER faculty in the past year. We need faculty members to increase the number of grants they get, and I hope that will also happen in the years to come. So there have been some large grants which have been received by faculty members, also some of which have been listed out here. And as a recognition of faculty members doing well, many of them have received various awards and honors, and our guest of honor today, Deepak Dhar, very recently received the Boltzmann Medal. We have had faculty members receive the Swarna Jayanti Fellowship, faculty members named as Fellows of the Royal Society of Chemistry, awards from journals. We have, for the first time, 3 faculty members have received a chaired professorship, which was endowed by the Rahul Bajaj Foundation. And we are very grateful to the Bajaj Foundation for sponsoring these chaired professorships. And Mausami, Pinaki, and Thomas are the first recipients of these chaired professorships. Shabanti and Bhumi have got bronze medals from the Chemical Research Society of India. Professor Sham Rai has received the Raja Ramanna Fellowship. Suthirt and Bhumi Shankar have received the Star Awards from SERB. Rajesh Gokhale joined the institute very briefly and moved to Delhi as the secretary of the Department of Biotechnology. Shidutto was elected a fellow of the Geological Society of London. Raghav got a senior fellowship of the DBT Wellcome Trust and India Alliance. Vaidyanathan became the associate editor of a prestigious journal and also received the CNR Rao Award for research in inorganic and physical chemistry. Sagar Pandit was elected as a life fellow of the Royal Entomological Society in the UK, and Satish Ogle received the CNR Rao Prize and delivered a lecture in advanced materials at the MRSI, the Material Research Society of India. It's not just the faculty who have done well, students have also done well. A team of IISER students won a gold medal at the iGEM synthetic biology competition held in the US. One of our BS MS students was the topper of the admission test for management school for the IIMs, the CAT exam in 2021. And what is really very nice is that we have now students who are engaging in startups at our incubation center on the campus, the Atal Incubation Center. Outreach activities have continued during the pandemic, and the Science Activity Center has been particularly active in the online mode, and the views online of what they put up is quite a staggeringly large number. And there is a lot of interaction and participation in these online activities. We also have faculty members now engaged with the Maharashtra government for the training of college teachers in Maharashtra, and the Maharashtra government is supporting this very strongly. We have partnerships with many universities outside the country, and of course we have a large number of partnerships within the country, and MOUs get signed, and there is some activity on the basis of the MOU also, and some of which is listed on this slide. The endowments committee has become particularly active in the past year, 2 years, and has becoming more and more successful in raising funds for various purposes, which we cannot get funding from the government. And for example, they've raised a lot of money for funding of students, especially students who have suffered because of the pandemic, because of various, because of their families losing jobs, etc. So it's really very heartening to see how students, the members of the endowment committee have managed to be quite successful in raising funds. We have also managed to put up a daycare center on campus, a new daycare center. If any of you, it's really a very well-constructed daycare center, and you should all go and see it. You don't have to be below a particular age to enter, but it's really well done, and it's really our engineers led by Colonel Shekhar really played a great role in making it look very friendly for children. The engineering services have also really excelled themselves and pushed themselves to the limit in restoring chemistry laboratories of the fire we had last July. And nearly all the labs except for one have been restored to activity. And they've really done a great job. And from the registrar, who was also the engineer in charge, to Nilesh, to Ganesh, and all the team members, they went out of the way to do things. And it is really commendable that within a month or so of the fire, a large fraction of the labs were functioning on campus. Of course, this wouldn't have been possible without all the efforts of the students and the staff members of chemistry and others, the housekeeping staff in particular, in getting the labs functioning. And the chemistry department had a function a few weeks ago to felicitate everyone involved in getting things back to a semblance of normalcy. So I'd like to end by telling you that the Institute is not doing badly, it's doing quite well. Our NIRF ranking increased incrementally from, I think, 25 to 24 in the past year. We are number 16 in the research category. And on various international rankings also, we are not doing badly. Of course, we can do better, and I'm sure over the next few years, given the efforts our faculty put in and our students put in, our rankings will only just go up. So I think that's about all I have to say regarding IISER right now. So now we got straight to business, which is introducing Deepak Dhar to all of you. I know all of the students have come to listen to Deepak and not to me. And Deepak has been at IISER since 2016. He came as a distinguished visiting professor 8 years ago, 6 years ago, and has been a distinguished professor since then at IISER. Before that, he was at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, where he was a distinguished professor. At the TIFR, getting to be a distinguished professor is really kind of an honor, because very, very few faculty members reach that level of accomplishment which makes them deserving of being a distinguished professor. And Deepak was one of the very few faculty members at TIFR who became a distinguished professor. Deepak got his early college education at the University of Allahabad, and then at IIT Kanpur, where he got his master's. He went on to Caltech to do his PhD. He did that with John Matthews, and in his PhD work, he proposed a model for the melting of solids and studied the critical behavior of fractals using exact renormalization group equations. And he was the first to define the spectral dimensions of fractals. After finishing his PhD, he came back to India as a postdoctoral fellow to the Tata Institute and became a regular faculty member there in 1980. And as I mentioned, he was there as a faculty member for 36 years until he retired in 2016. His research work is in the area of statistical physics, and he's known for his work on the abelian sandpile model of self-organized criticality. I don't have my glasses on, so I hope I'm reading right. But on fractals, slow relaxation in magnets, percolation in animal problems, and growth models. And of course, Deepak has been recognized in many, many different ways. He's a fellow of the Indian Academy of Science, Indian National Science Academy. He's got the Bhatnagar Award, the INSA Young Scientist Award, the Schrieffer Prize of the ICTP, that's the International Center for Theoretical Physics, the S.N. Bose Medal of the Indian National Science Academy, the Twas Award in Physics, and most recently, the Boltzmann Medal. But these recognitions really don't capture what Deepak is. I was in TIFR for 27 years or so, and at TIFR, he was a phenomenon. everyone talked about him in the greatest of respect. You met visitors even at NCBS in Bangalore where I was, and they would know about Deepak Dhar. And, you know, I think a lot of the respect people had for TIFR theoretical physics came because Deepak Dhar was at TIFR. And it's really something quite amazing. And I've also had the privilege of collaborating scientifically with him. So about 14 years or so, we had a problem we had experimental results we couldn't explain. They seemed different from what was normally thought to be correct in the field. And we had an idea of what might be happening, but to convince people, we needed to have a quantitative model. I talked to many physicists in the Indian Institute of Science and other places in Bangalore, and no one was really of any help. Then one fine day when I was visiting TIFR, I went and had a discussion with Deepak, and lo and behold, I didn't have to complete my sentences in this discussion because he knew exactly what I was trying to say. And so I described what I thought was happening, and his reaction was, this is obvious. So I told him, but this is not obvious to people working in the field. And it took me perhaps half an hour to convince him that this problem was worth his attention. And we had a great collaboration. Santosh Jha, who was my student at that time, I think benefited tremendously, as I did, in this interaction with Deepak. And I realized how particular he is about his science. At the time of writing the manuscript, I had been writing manuscripts for 16, 17 years at that time. And now I prepared what I thought was a pretty much ready to submit manuscript and sent it to Deepak. And it took 10 to's and fro's before he was happy enough to pass it. I really learned a lot about writing manuscript and being very precise in wording from this interchange with him. And I should acknowledge my gratitude for that to him. So when I came to IISER, Deepak was actually the only scientist here who I had really interacted with at any significant level, and in terms of scientific discussion. And it was really nice to come to a place where there was at least one familiar face and one familiar person you could talk science to. And we continued talking science, discussing science, and 2 years ago, we had a second paper together. This time, the to and fro in manuscripts was only 3 or 4 times, I think, because I think I learned a little from that previous interchange. But again, it was great to do things with him. So with that, I'll call Deepak out here, and please join me in welcoming him. So before we start, we'll give him a small memento. So I should just mention that Deepak did not want to be called a chief guest because he says, I'm not a guest. So I don't know what to call him, but anyway, he's our Foundation Day lecturer. And we give him a little memento.
Okay, so thank you, Jayant, for a very kind introduction. Let me just say, for the benefit of students, that the reason the number of interchanges was so large was because the style of writing for physicists and biologists is so different. There are some things which the biologists explain at great length, and experimental details. The solution was of this pH and so on, and all those things were considered as irrelevant details by me. and vice versa. You know, that kinds of things which I thought were very important were not so important for the actual experimentalists. But it was very instructive and useful to be able to communicate and end with something which is acceptable to both of us. So, today I decided to talk about geometrical phase transitions. That is a topic on which I have been working for a fairly long time, but I have tried to keep the level of presentation here elementary enough so that the beginning students will be able to follow most of the discussion. And because of that, I guess there will not be too much for advanced students and faculty and so on, but you know, that is the kind of choice we have to make. So, let me go on. So, the general plan of talk is like this. I will define what are phases and phase transitions in general, and then discuss what I call geometrical phase transitions through 3 examples: percolation, hard sphere, long rods. And there are other geometrical phase transitions which I will not be able to discuss in the lecture today. So, like jamming in granular matter, and then give a short summary. Okay. So, the word phases and phase transitions is generally quite familiar to people. For example, you know, when you heat up water, it becomes steam, and that is called a phase transition from liquid to gas. You cool it up, then it becomes a solid, ice, which is also a phase transition. So, here is a typical, it is for water, but it is a pressure temperature phase diagram. So, the y axis is pressure, x is temperature. Each point represents a particular control parameters you can put water on, a particular temperature and pressure, and its state is usually uniquely determined by the pressure and temperature. We are taking pure water with no impurities, then it will be decided by the pressure and temperature. So, that is therefore equilibrium systems, except at phase boundaries, where if you tell the pressure and temperature, you cannot actually uniquely tell what is the density. So, at these lines, the state is not unique, everywhere else it is unique. Okay. So, the definition of phase transitions, usually phases are best defined by answers to yes/no questions. Which yes/no question you will ask will depend on what phase transition you are trying to define. But you say, is this a solid? So, the answer is yes, yes. You can change the control parameters a very little bit, and the answer remains a solid. And then all of a sudden it becomes no, and then when the yes becomes a no, that is a phase transition. Okay. It turns out that this definition is good, but not perfect. And usually people take some slightly more complicated definition, which is given below. So, it says that you take the control parameters and measure some property or the other of the system. And usually when you change parameters, this property changes continuously. But sometimes the dependence on the control parameters may be non-analytic, means the differential derivative does not exist, or the second derivative does not exist, or some such thing. And so, whenever this happens, you can call it a phase transition. Sounds a little bit artificial. So, for example, if I look at the density of the material as a function of P and T, most of the time it is a smooth function, except at the phase boundaries where it is a discontinuous function. So, density is a good example. We can take something like conductivity. So, I can take some metal, I cool it down, looks the same, you know, it looks like a metal, but you know, you have to watch carefully. You see that, oh, if I measure the electrical conductivity, sometimes it is 0, sometimes it is non-zero. So, that is a superconducting phase transition. The point about this is the property I used to measure was resistivity, which is actually not an equilibrium property. What you got to do is you got to take the material, apply a tiny voltage, measure how much current comes, and take the ratio, and that defines the conductivity. conductivity is a response function to an external perturbation. So, I can use the response to an external perturbation to define phase transitions. I just took one more example, flux of fluid through a tube. So, you have a thin tube and send up fluid through it, water, with some pressure, and how much fluid goes through depends on the pressure difference at the two ends, and you can plot the flux as a function of pressure. For small pressure differences it is linear, but later it becomes non-linear. That is when the fluid changes from streamline flow to turbulent flow. Okay? And so, here the flux of the fluid can be used as a measure of phase transition from the laminar flow to the turbulent flow. And this is a non-equilibrium phase transition. I am not confining myself to equilibrium systems. You can take a system which is fluid passing through a tube, which is a non-equilibrium system, and the response of such a system to something or the other can be used to measure the phase transition. But coming back to it, why did we need all this? Why wasn't the previous definition good enough? So, here it is a very interesting point, is that if you look at the phase diagram here, there is a liquid and there is a gas, but if you go like this, you can go from the liquid to the gas without any non-smooth behavior occurring, which means that the liquid and gas actually have to be called the same phase, because they, you cannot tell where will the liquid end, where will the gas begin. It will be an arbitrary choice, and it is not useful to make an arbitrary choice. But then if liquid and gas are the same phase, then when I go from here to here, you go from the same phase to the same phase. And then why is it that called a phase transition at all? So, the answer is that because there is a density as a discontinuous jump, that is why it is called a phase transition. So, the non-analytic response is a better characterization than the yes-no answer, even though that seems to be the more obvious thing to do. Okay. So, now this is there has been a lot of work in phase transitions in statistical physics, but in this small slide I have tried to summarize all that. And so, it says that we are trying to understand different phases of matter, and most of the time, to a good approximation, molecules interact by pairwise additive potential, which is repulsive at short distances, attractive at large distances. If you put a large number of molecules in a box, there is a unique equilibrium state, and this is the prescription of the equilibrium state mech, is that it gives you the probability of a microstate is given by this formula, exponential minus beta h. And you change the control parameters and calculate the properties of the system using this prescription, and you actually find different phases and sharp phase transitions for the same Hamiltonian just by varying the control parameters once the number of particles is large. This was not very obvious to people around 1900, but since then it has been well appreciated and understood that actually you do not need to have a different Hamiltonian for the ice and water, they use the same Hamiltonian and you still get two different phases. Okay. However, if you start to work with the Lennard-Jones type of interaction, quite often you cannot actually do exact theoretical calculation of the partition function or some such thing. One can put the stuff on a computer and put 10 to the power 5 particles and calculate approximately the equilibrium properties. So, if I do this with water, maybe I can calculate what is the boiling point of water at room temperature by running a computer program. But I would say that if you just have a computer program which pulls out the answer, that is not the same as understanding, because you could have just gone and measured the stuff in the first place, right. So, to understand It's not enough to use a computer program which will calculate the properties. But so what I need to do is I need to study simpler models with easier to handle interactions which show similar behavior. Once I understand that, then I can say, okay, this one is more or less the same thing, slightly more complicated. And there is a sort of more educated way of saying this is to say that it turns out that there is this theory called the renormalization group theory, where it says that if you take different systems and you calculate their behavior near phase transitions, then you get exactly the same answer. So, there are some answers which do not change at all when you study the boiling of water or the boiling of alcohol or some such thing. Okay? So, when I change a model to a simpler model, there are some things which will be perfectly correctly calculated and you do not make any approximation in them. Okay, so now I give you examples of phase transitions, and the first example is called percolation. So, I just take a box in which I put spheres of equal size, and they are made of gold and plastic. So, one of them is colored yellow and blue here, and you just mix them up and put them in the box and measure the conductance of the system end to end by putting a multimeter across. And so, it is clear what happens. If the material is mostly non-conducting, then when you put the thing across, even though there are a few gold balls in between, it will show no conduction. On the other hand, if the material is 80% conducting, then you will see that there is a path of connected gold pieces and it will conduct. And so, there is a phase transition from an insulating to a conducting phase. Now, this point is quite simple and obvious and clear, perhaps even to a high school student. I do not have to invoke any complicated ideas, it is intuitively obvious phase transition. Okay? So, this is called a geometrical phase transition because it occurs because of the geometry of the spheres. And no notion of temperature is needed, and only ideas of probability and geometry. Okay? So now why do I want to still study it? So, it says that if you actually go near this phase transition and try to understand the phase transition in this obvious system a bit better, then it turns out that whatever you learn will be applicable to the wider class of phase transitions. So, for example, what happens in this system is that if you increase the concentration of gold balls, then there is a cluster of gold balls whose size increases if you increase the concentration, and near the critical threshold this size diverges in some way, and you can study how it diverges. And if you study other phase transitions, you can also define something like a correlation length where similar things happen. Okay? So, now for studying all these other complicated phase transitions, there are general theories like renormalization group theory, conformal field theory, which you can use to calculate the behavior of such systems. And these theories are more general, but also more abstract and conceptually sophisticated. And percolation theory is so much more obvious and simple example, and you can use as a testing ground for testing or verifying the ideas of these theories. You know, I do not know, conformal field theory is very subtle and complicated. But if you understand how it works in the percolation problem, then you can also understand better how it works in a more complicated problem. Okay. So, there is a sort of percolation has a variation which is called directed percolation, where there is a lattice and there are bonds, some bonds are present, some are not present, but the bonds are directed, they only go down in this example. And so, it is called directed percolation. It becomes equivalent to something called epidemic models, which are of course of great interest in current times. Historically, these epidemic models were started by Hammersley as a spread of blight in apple orchards, but he generalized it to the case where the trees can move around, that is infected individuals. And so, you can study these models now. And of course, in the last 2 years, a very large number of papers have been published on spread of epidemics. I think most of them are forgettable, but that's the way it is. Okay, so now I come to a second, also pretty obvious example of geometrical phase transitions, and this is called the Hard sphere model. It's one of the oldest models studied. And molecules are approximated at hard spheres. So people had ideal gases, but they said there are no ideal gases. There are actually interactions between molecules, right? So the model they used was billiard ball model. Molecules are like hard spheres and they collide. Okay, and so this has been studied since 1900. And people said what happens when the density becomes a little bit big. Then there are non-ideal gases, there are corrections, there are virial expansion, and sometimes the virial expansion breaks down. Then what happens? Presumably some phase transition to something else. So all this was thought through. But it took 57 years of that order for people to realize that actually if you take just a model of hard disks in 2D and study their collisions and study their properties, it actually undergoes a phase transition as a function of the pressure, which is like the melting transition. Because at high densities, this set of hard disks balls will be crystalline, it will show periodic arrangement. At low density, it is like a gas and there is no crystal. So the crystal gets lost once the density is changed. Okay? So this is an example of a purely geometric phase transition. And you might wonder, now that I've told you this, how come it took people 60 years to realize this simple point? And even then only after the computers came into being that one could do this, and they couldn't imagine this before. But anyway, this is the way it is. So this is just a slide summarizing what we know about the melting transition in hard spheres. So it says for hard spheres, all allowed configurations where the spheres don't overlap are considered equally likely. The equation of state is that pressure is proportional to temperature, but it's a complicated function of density. And there is no liquid gas transition in this case because the hard spheres don't attract each other at all. But there is a crystal to fluid transition as the density is decreased. The solid phase has a periodic density and sharp bragg spots, the liquid doesn't have it, and density as a function of pressure will have a jump. Okay? Exact equation of state is still not known in spite of so much work on such an elementary model. So here is a much more recent computer simulation study of hard spheres. So these are 3D hard spheres, and there are about 5,000 of them. You put them in a box. There is some initial state in which one part is crystalline and the other part is fluid-like. There is no crystal order. And the experiment is done at constant pressure. And if the pressure is a little bit high, 11.7 here, everything becomes crystalline. So the crystalline phase invades the fluid region and it becomes crystalline. On a slightly lower pressure, everything becomes a fluid. So it shows that there is an equilibrium state which is a fluid in one case and crystal in the other case, and there is a phase transition. Okay? And this is a more sort of technical picture. Pressure is a function of density, eta is the density, which is the volume fraction covered by the fluid, covered by the material, and the pressure rises, and at some point there is a jump, and there is a solid case which is an FCC crystal. But it has this interesting stuff that actually there is a line here, dashed line, where the density jumps from here to here. But if you actually do the experiment, it keeps on going and doesn't realize that I should have crystallized. So this is called a supercooled liquid. And similarly, you can start with a solid and decrease the density, and it can keep on going as a solid for a while. So you realize that even in this simple model, there is a phase transition, but there are also these other funny stuff, metastable phases, where the density is high, but crystalline order has not set in, and all these kinds of stuff. And they can also be studied within the same model. And they are not fully understood even now. But here is a picture of an experimental realization of melting, because the last one was a computer simulation study, it was not a real experiment. This one is a real experiment. So, how do you do a real experiment? People can do this scanning tunneling microscope or some such thing, but this one is actually a confocal microscopy picture, but it's with colloidal particles which are about a few microns in size, and this is done with a confocal microscopy. You can take three-dimensional pictures of a slice. So, this is a slice of a three-dimensional stuff. It is like CAT scan. So, you go through and you can do it at different places, but they are keeping the same place. This is the starting configuration, and as time goes on it becomes crystalline. So, this is the experimental demonstration of a real experiment where you see. I think I should say that the colloidal particles are known to be very spherical, and they are they do not have much interaction except the hard core interaction. So, this is a good model of hard spheres. Okay, other shapes, but so far we discussed spheres, but one can study other shapes, and then the structure of the dense packed state depends on the shape, and then it also, the nature of transition depends on the shape, and you can consider different shapes, but you can also consider the problem on a lattice. So, molecules, the centers can only lie on some grid points, but they still have excluded volume, and then what happens there. And there is some set of pictures I wanted to show because these are very cute. So, these are just there is a lattice, each square is a 2 by 2 square, and as the density changes then you get different states, and in the lower one it is a rod, it is a linear 4 cells in a line, and you can see different structures emerge as the density changes. And this is a geometrical, everything is just governed by geometry, there is nothing else going on. And these are more complicated shapes. So, there is Z, L and T shapes. So, these molecules are like Z, and the next one is L, next one is T, and they are called tetramino because there are 4 squares make up a single molecule. Okay? And just nice pictures. So, there is a lot of interesting structure which happens, which one can try to understand. But we did not study these because these are too complicated to understand even here. So, we studied something called long rods, which are the previous picture to this, the lower one. So, the long rod study has a long history. Onsager, who is sort of one of the heroes of statistical physics, he showed in a system of long rods, you just take a liquid and take long molecules, rod-like molecules, and if the density becomes big, the rod-like molecules will become aligned to each other. So, then the rod-like molecules become aligned to each other, the liquid becomes anisotropic, it has different properties along the axis and away from the axis. So, this was his prediction, and it was actually realized in the solution of tobacco mosaic virus in water, because tobacco mosaic virus particles have almost the same size and they can be easily realized in biggish sizes, and experimentally produced other materials cannot give you the same size as well as biological molecules do. Okay? So, this was the first theoretical treatment of a geometrical phase transition because it is in 1949. And the study with spheres was done in 57. So, it is quite amazing. But anyway, so now these things are called nematic liquids, and the first of many liquid crystalline phases. And so now people can see many more complicated stuff. There are smectic liquids and spiral orders and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, this is an experimental picture of a tobacco mosaic virus suspension. So, there is a liquid. This is just what liquid on two sides, but if you put tobacco mosaic virus particles in this liquid, they phase separate into two regions, one is high density, one is low density. So, here there are two, and if you just look at them, they do not look very different because they are not, the concentration of virus particles is less than 1% or so. But if you look them in polarized light, then you can immediately see the difference between them, because the polarized light is rotated differently if along the axis or away from the axis, and then if you put an analyzer, then sometimes you get some color, some other color. So this is also a macroscopic picture. You can, you can do with naked eye this kind of an experiment and see that there is an anisotropy in the liquid, and it is undergoing this geometrical phase transition. Okay, so now comes to the theoretical study of geometrical phase transitions. So we studied long rods like this and just put them on a lattice and allow only excluded volume interaction. What happens? So the only theoretically known result for this has been actually there is by Heilmann and Lieb in 1972. They showed that if K is 2, these are dimers, then there is no ordering transition as a function of density. Then in 2007, we did some Monte Carlo study. This is not a proof, but we showed that there is nothing happens at K equal to 3 and 4 either. There is no ordering transition. Okay. And then people were used to wonder what happens. Maybe there is no phase transition for any K, because the argument was that if you take the fully packed case, then it is clear that there cannot be any ordering there, because there are many configurations. There is a picture here. So this is with size 4 particles. So you take a big lattice, but you can break into 4 by 4 squares. Each square you can fill horizontally or vertically. So there are many ways you can completely cover the lattice, and most of them are not ordered overall orientational order. So you won't see any overall orientational order, and of course many more complicated shapes could occur at full packing. Anyway, so in 2007 we showed that if K is bigger than 6, then you actually see 3 phases. This is also a numerical Monte Carlo study. And so at low density you see equal number of horizontal and vertical rods, and here the horizontal rods are colored red and vertical rods are colored green, just for visual simplicity. And at intermediate density almost everything becomes same direction, and at high density again they become disordered again. So there is a second phase transition where the ordering is lost when you increase the density even further. Okay. So now in the last year or so we have actually studied this problem further, and we have recently given plausible but not rigorous arguments that the nematic to high density disordered phase transition is actually first order. And here is a picture of this as a function of K. For different values of K, the y-axis is the density of holes and x-axis is the chemical potential of rods. So when you increase the chemical potential of rods, density increases, but at some point there is a discontinuous jump. And let me just say that this particular slide, it looks like there is a vertical jump, but actually if you look very closely, it is not perfectly discontinuous. There is a rounding off. But that is because we are working on a K by infinity strip, and the rounding off is presumably the effect of the finite width of the sample. But we cannot study the much wider samples, and so this is not a proof, this is a indication that actually there is a phase transition which is a discontinuous transition. So anyway, if there is a phase transition, then we can conjecture at what chemical potential will this transition occur and what will be the jump in density across this. So the chemical potential is called mu star Kd, which is a function of K and also a dimension. You can work on 2-dimensional lattice, but you can also work on d-dimensional lattice, hypercubical. And so these are sort of large K limit. The density of holes goes as log K by K squared. So if you take this particular ratio, it actually tends to 1. And similarly, the mu star has this funny behavior. And the density of the holes in the high density phase is much smaller than epsilon 1. It decreases faster than a power law for all power. So it kind of decreases exponentially. I don't have to worry about the details of this. I just wrote it down that there is actually some precise equation you can write But right now it's a conjecture, it is not a proof, and it will be nice to have a proof. The interesting point about this is that even though the problem, if you define it on a square lattice, on a cubic lattice, it looks so different. In the end, if you take this limit, the answer does not depend on d, it is the same whatever d you work in, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? So, that is an interesting non-trivial result. And then in these limits you can actually work out the coefficients of all these, they are 1. It is not some funny complicated number, it is 1. So, some such thing should have a simple and easy explanation is what we would hope and expect, and it is not shown. So, that is why it is a conjecture, and it is an interesting conjecture, one can work on it. And so, here is the summary. So, the first thing I tried to say was that study of models showing geometrical phase transitions is interesting and instructive. Instructive because it helps you understand other phase transitions as well, and interesting because here is a problem which you at some level 5th grade student can understand, but can you understand it a little bit better. And the first model I discussed was percolation model. Of course, I did not go into the details, but it is a very interesting theoretically tractable model. Lots of very powerful mathematicians became interested in phase transitions because all other models were very complicated, but percolation, mathematicians can understand it is very simply defined and easy to work with model. Okay? So, then Hurd spheres is a simple model of melting. So, in melting what happens is that there is a crystalline structure, but when you change density the crystalline structure is lost. We forget all other details about melting. This basic feature is reproduced by the simple model of Hurd spheres. So, we say that Hurd spheres is a simple model of melting. Does not have all the details, but it has the essential features, and I told you what are the essential features. More complicated shapes can describe other mesophases, and this subject is very interesting because liquid crystals are very interesting. They are in displays in your computers and all kinds of stuff. So, there is a lot of technology associated with liquid crystals, and there they study all these problems in great detail. And then I just indicated briefly the kinds of results one can get, exact results for the second phase transition in a system of long needles in d-dimensional hypercubical lattices. It is a long sentence, but anyway that is the way it is. So, anyway, here is a list of acknowledgements. My own work on this subject would not have been possible, but the collaboration with a large number of colleague students, postdocs over many years. The number of years is 35, as Jayan mentioned. And here there are 3 names which are colored in red, who are sort of people from IISER Pune. And this is all I would like to say now and stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. So, thank you, Professor Dhar, for this really informative talk on geometric phase transitions, particularly about long rods. So, and this reminds me of a particular thing that Richard Feynman said, that nearly everything is really interesting if you go into it deeply enough. And we are really proud that we have someone here at our institute who is living up to these wise words of Richard Feynman. So, the floor is open for any questions.
Yeah.
Oh, very nice talk. I was wondering, how do you define hole?
Hole is an absence of a particle. It is just where which is not covered by a rod is called a hole.
Would it be fair to say that it is a bit intuitive to think that when the density goes up, you're just going to have more number of holes, or is this non-trivial?
It just density of holes is 1 minus rho in my definition, where rho is the density of particles and 1 minus rho is the density of holes.
Okay, thank you.
A very interesting talk. I actually have 2-3 questions. So first one was that when you define geometric phase transition, so then again, anything where there is a change in the geometry would be a geometric phase transition. For example, water to liquid to vapor, or liquid to solid in water would be a geometric phase transition.
So, in the case of water, of course, you have to change the temperature. And I was saying that I don't want to introduce the notion of temperature energy, and can I work without introducing the idea of temperature at all. So, you will not be able to understand properties of water as a purely geometrical phase transition, because one important thing in water which everybody knows, high school students, is called latent heat of melting. This model cannot produce latent heat of melting because it doesn't have enough structure. But I was saying that let us not worry about energetics and only look at the geometrical structure, and then what happens is that crystalline structure gets lost, and that part we are able to get with this simple model.
Okay, thank you. My next question is that in the long rod scenario, two related questions. One is that you have seen disorder to order and disorder. So whether the second disorder is basically coming back, is a reentrant thing, or is a new disordered state that you are getting. And the related question is the chemical potential definition. So how exactly in this particular case you are defining chemical potential, because there is no energy, I guess.
Okay.
So therefore, the rest
Yeah.
of the part.
So, the answer to the first question, this we worried about a lot and we do not know. It is not clear to us that the second high density disordered phase is a continuation of the low density disordered phase. We were not able to identify any special features of the high density phase which distinguish it from the low density phase, but it is not connected to it right now in any way, because there is this intermediate stuff which is different, and there is no way to go across without crossing this. The second question is definition of chemical potential. So, here there is a notion of entropy of the number of configurations, and derivative of entropy with density is called chemical potential. In the usual language, it is e to the power beta mu or beta mu. Beta mu together is one variable.
So how you are changing the entropy here? By introducing more rods or by?
Yeah. So, you take a system at a particular density, it has an entropy, then you change the density by a tiny bit and see how much is the change in entropy, and the derivative of entropy with density is the chemical potential.
Okay, thank you.
In my case, it is called scaled chemical potential because there is no temperature. Beta mu comes together as one number, and that is what we were discussing.
Thank you very much.
So as usual, excellent talk. And so you mentioned about supercooled liquid and also maintaining the FCC phase below a certain density. So this kind of hysteresis as an experimentalist we also often encounter in different phase transitions.
Yes.
Is there any simplified or generic model to answer the hysteresis that often occur in phase transition? So
I was saying or showing you that this model already does have the phenomenology which shows that there is a you can have metastable states which I can experimentally access. So it is there, but it is not theoretically accessible. Nobody has a good theory of either the equilibrium branch or the metastable branch of the hard sphere problem.
So, what is the physical reason behind phase transitions being discontinuous? Why aren't they smooth?
So I told you it is by definition. There are quantities which change continuously, but I ask a question which is qualitative question which can only change from yes to no. So by construction, I construct a question, it has a discontinuous answer, and then use it to define the phase transition.
Yes, but what is the physical reason?
So
it happens, why does it happen?
Okay, so for example, in the first example we showed, sometimes there is a connected path of gold balls from one end to the other, and in other case there isn't one. So that is the physical reason why there is a phase transition from conducting to insulating phase.
But sir, for more complicated cases?
So in more complicated cases, there is a crystal and there is no crystal. Okay, we showed that this point that there is a crystalline phase and there is non-crystalline phase, you can understand in simple model like hard spheres.
Hello?
Yes?
Sir, so on one of the slides you showed that there is a simulation in which a crystalline state, I mean, in which a liquid state was flanked on both sides by crystalline state. And as you change the pressure, it either converted into a completely crystalline state or a completely liquid state. So like, what was the significance of taking, I mean, both of the states in the initial system? I mean, if you had only crystalline states, on changing the pressure, it might have converted into liquid.
If you want to study phase transitions, you have to make a very nice and clean experiment. If you don't make a clean experiment, you can end up with the water at -5 degrees centigrade. Okay? So, it is a fact that you can end up there, but the state you end up in is not really an equilibrium state. So, you need to ensure that you are getting into equilibrium, and these experiments were done like this because it is quite hard to actually ensure nice clean experiments where you see a clean reproducible phase transition.
Yes, sir. So basically, having islands of liquid phase in that case, it ensures a proper phase transition into liquid phase.
No, so you can certainly construct in a lab states which are neither solid nor liquid. As you said, there is a block of ice, but there is a pool of liquid inside the block of ice. So, is this a solid or a liquid? The answer is neither, it is a mixture of solid and liquid, right. So, I would like to first understand the case where solid, and I would like to understand what is a liquid, and then I can worry about cases where things are not either this or this, but they are a complicated mixture of these in various geometries.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes. Here means, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so are there any examples of these kind of geometrical phase transitions in nature where some kind of patterns are formed or not formed?
No, so pattern formation is certainly an interesting topic which people study, but it is perceived as patterns are very complicated things, they are not pure phases. So, usually when people study phase transition, they study transition from one phase to another, not one phase to 15 phases. So, to that degree, pattern formation is outside the course.
But the certain patterns, I mean, if you kind of classify certain patterns, I mean, assign it with some, attribute, which kind of changes continuously, and then there is a change in the pattern's attribute to a new pattern such that there is a discontinuity.
Yeah. So, yes. So, for example, the case I discussed very briefly was a fluid passing through a tube. There is a change in structure which is you can measure just the flux, but you can actually measure the convection cells or kinds of stuff which develop when the transition from streamline to something else happens. So, one can study these, but these are non-equilibrium systems. Here. Okay.
What is referring to chiral structures, spin canted system, chiral structures, would they classify into this situation where you have this pattern?
Yeah, sure.
So, spin canted structures could form a pattern and there is a transition above and below.
Yeah. So, certainly one can imagine cases, the simple case people study is called the Ising model, where things go from up to equally likely up and down to something which is mostly up and less often down. But you can imagine that there is a solution with lot of optically active molecules, but they can change into each other. Then sometimes they all become of the same type, and that is an optically active stuff, and the opposite is the racemic mixture where both of them are equally likely. And people have argued that in prebiotic life, all molecules were of various types and they were all, all types of stuff, but eventually all of them became one-handed. There is a phase transition in early universe, not very, very early, but somewhat early.
Wonderful talk, sir. Thank you so much. Probably it's too early to ask, but I'm looking for what will be the earliest applications of this, which will disrupt an industry.
In application to industry, I tried to mention that the liquid crystals actually have a lot of application to industry. Okay? If you can understand the properties of things like ice better, you can also predict the behavior of glaciers and snow slides and things like that, avalanches. And people, so usually you need something in between. If you want real application, then you are not satisfied with qualitative understanding, you need quantitative understanding. Okay? However, what often happens is that I can use my qualitative understanding to narrow down the possibilities for quantitative stuff. So I am making a soap. I know that it should be some complicated molecule, but with some active groups at the end. But possible things is very, very big. But I can say that, look, I want something to be have this behavior, this behavior, this behavior. So qualitative understanding says that these kinds of molecules are more likely to be my type than other ones. So you can prune down the set of possible things you should look harder into from theory alone. That is where the most of the real use of the theoretical modeling comes in real applications. Because if I tell you that if you make this molecule, it will make a nice soap, or I give you 50 molecules, one of them will be nice soap. It's hard to actually make all those 50 molecules. It requires a lot of product development. But if you can narrow down the possibility to 5, that is a great gain. And that is what the theorists can hope to get, and not much more. Maybe they will not be able to tell which of the 5 will be best, but one of these is more likely to work than one of those.
Hello, sir. In the percolation model, you said there is a transition from conductivity to insulator kind of, as you change the concentration of plastic spheres or the gold spheres.
Yeah.
So wouldn't the conductivity also depends on the permutation of the plastic structures or plastic balls inside that cubic lattice?
I was taking it to be a model in which the plastic is fully insulating. So its conductivity is 0.
Yeah, but for example, in the case where we have almost most of the particles are gold particles, but only some are plastic balls, but they are arranged so that where we are connecting wires on the both ends, right? So you are connecting wires at the position where there is plastic ball. So it won't be conducting, right?
No, we conduct across 2 faces. I have a cube.
Okay.
I have to put the 2 faces across and measure the conductivity across a face, not across 2 points.
Okay, sir. Thanks.
Then you get much more reproducible answers, and that is where you see a sharp transition.
Yes, sir. Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Deepak. Here, center. Thanks for the nice talk. I was just wondering, is there any hysteresis associated with the transition like melting of ice?
Yes, of course.
How much is the delta T temperature?
So it depends on the details of the thing, but as I said, you can go to temperature like -5 degrees centigrade easily without water becoming ice.
No, but let's keep it at a constant pressure.
At constant pressure, room pressure.
Oh, wow. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Super heating of water before it becomes steam is also known. It can also be quite big actually. So people make eggs in microwave, you just put the egg in a microwave, and if you don't shake it, then you can put it at it's there. As soon as you shake it, it explodes. So, it was this unstable state which was actually there, and it was quite easy to make in everyday home without complicated instruments.
Geometric phase transition are always temperature independent, because some high TC superconductors they showing electronic nematic ordering. So that might be also dependent. That might be also a geometric transition, but it's depends on temperature transition.
Yeah, no. So by definition, geometrical phase transitions, you should not use the word temperature ever. That's the definition of the geometrical transition. It involves no notion of temperature. Real life, there will be applications of these where temperature is a variable, but it's an approximation. You know, that's the simplification I introduce in the model, is that I get rid of temperature altogether and still keep some essential features of the problem. Okay? For the sake of students, because this is a very common question. You know, people say that you know, you have made some approximation and it is not as good as the real thing has this complication and that complication and that complication. You have to distinguish between baby and bathwater and throw one and not the other.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Dhar, for your talk.
Foundation Day is also the day when the past, present, and future come together, taking vows to uplift the institute to the greatest possible heights and dimensions. With this, I would like to invite Professor Girish sir to come on stage and start the award ceremony. Sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. With the pandemic affecting normal functionality, it's been a long gap since we have met in Raman Hall to basically celebrate the achievements of students, staff, and faculty. So today we do so with a backlog. So you will see a large number of human beings who are a subset of our community who are being honored here on stage. I request Professor Udgaonkar, Director IISER Pune, and Professor Deepak Dhar to come on stage to hand over the certificates and awards. You're most welcome to come up and remove your mask so that you have a nice memory, a photograph of you receiving your award. And if you wish not to do so, you have the freedom to not remove your mask also. So the first set of recognitions include certificates of appreciation for teaching excellence, which are given to IISER faculty. This is the first year that IISER is recognizing faculty for teaching. And this program is something we plan to continue from now on, every year recognizing teaching excellence on Foundation Day. Today, there are 10 such faculty who will be recognized. These educators, who I will name, who will come on stage in the next few minutes, have been described in student feedback, and I use the term student feedback because many of these names have been decided based on feedback which we get from students every year. The adjectives which have been used for these students include the teachers are inspiring, they are passionate, they motivate us, they are very capable, they are humble, I don't know who said that about whom, organized, they're very dedicated, and generous and caring. The last two were about me. So I would request these teachers to come on stage when I call out your names and receive their certificates from Professor Dhar and Professor Udgaonkar. Professor Nishikant Subedar from the Biology Department. Thank you, Professor Subedar. Professor Sutit Dey from the Biology Department. Dr. Anirban Hazra is an awardee. He is not here from the Chemistry Department, so he will receive his award in absentia. Professor Ramakrishna G. Bhatt from the Chemistry Department. Is Professor Sunil Mukhi in the audience? I have not heard from him. If not, then he receives the award in absentia. Dr. Sunita Varadarajan, also from the Physics Department. Dr. Chandrasheel Bhagwat from the Mathematics Department. Dr. Amit Hogadi from the Mathematics Department. Dr. Neena Joseph Mani from the Earth and Climate Science Department is not here, so in absentia. Dr. Shalini Sharma from the Humanities and Social Sciences Department. So those were the certificates of appreciation for teaching excellence to faculty. We now go through a phase transition, if Dr. Deepak Dhar can allow me to call it that, and go to the second set of recognitions, which are for students who have done exceptionally well in academics. The students who get these awards in the first year, the first 2 semesters, are specifically named after Professor C.N.R. Rao, eminent scientist and academician. Again, I would ask students to come onto stage to receive their certificates one at a time. There's a backlog. We haven't had this award ceremony since 2020, well, 2019. So I'm going to start from the earliest batch. The C.N.R. Rao Education Foundation Prize for Kshitij Verma. If you could please come on stage. This is for semester 1. Again, the CNR Education Foundation Prize for Mihir Sridhar Dingarkar. Academic Excellence Award for S. Madhveshwaran, semester 3. Academic Excellence Award for Sabrinath JP. Rishikesh Anil Patil. There are 3 more awards for students who have passed out from IISER Pune. They are Vijay Marulia in absentia, Sriram Raghunath in absentia, and Jitendra Singh Palash again in absentia. The next awards go to integrated PhD students, and these students and all the others which I have named are all getting awards because of academic excellence. They have very high CGPA. Devasmita Mitra from biology. Pratim Kumar Das from chemistry. Ronit Devnath from mathematics. And Tamagna Chaudhary from physics. We now move to the prizes for 2021. The first is to Saransh Rakesh Agarwal, CNR Rao Education Foundation Prize. Shah Neev Vinay in absentia, again CNR Rao Education Foundation Prize, followed by Shivang Yadav, CNR Rao Education Foundation Prize. We move on to the BSMS Academic Excellence Awards. Ankan Nath. Ravish Mehta. Madheshwaran S. Rishikesh Anil Patil. Viraj Merulia again in absentia. Sarkar Meghadeepa Manojit, integrated PhD. Sajid Saikia, integrated PhD. Jaiswal Shubham Shravan, integrated PhD. And Saurabh Pant, integrated PhD for physics. We now move on to the academic awards for 2022, which is the current year. Again, CNR Rao Education Foundation Prize, Srirang Nabar. Academic Excellence Prize for Rick Sarkar. Kshitij Verma, Academic Excellence. Mihir Neve. Pratyush MR. Pratyush MR. Okay, not here. Radhika Malviya, Integrated PhD Biology. Ankita Chandra, Integrated PhD Chemistry. Farmanullah, Integrated PhD Physics. And last but not the least, the director in his speech talked about Chirag Gupta, who topped CAT in 2021. Chirag Gupta. A final round of applause for all teachers and students who have got these prizes. Thank you.
Now I would like to invite our registrar, Colonel Raja Shekhar, to complete the rest of the award ceremony.
Good afternoon. I have the privilege of announcing this Best Non-Teaching Awards. And this has also got the awardees for the COVID-19 testing test center and even the vaccination center. So I'll start with the Non-Teaching Best Employee Awards. First is Sandeep Sangpal from Biology for his contribution in the department. Yogesh Kolab from Mathematics. Vibhas Shevde, Technical Assistant from ECS in absentia. Sandeep Kanade, Technical Assistant from Chemistry. Aniruddha Chatterjee from the Dean's Office, Dean's Faculty's Office. Sahili Damle from Academics. Ranjan Kishore Sahu, again from Academics. Santosh Nevse, Assistant Registrar Administration, for his outstanding contribution as Secretary of the Task Force. Harish Patil from Administration. Snehal Batule from Finance and Accounts. for an outstanding contribution for the ERP and the most complicated module, that is the finance and accounts. Siddesh Tavde from Finance and Accounts. Savita Mapari from Grants Management. Varsha Jain, again from Grants Management. John Albert from Stores and Purchase. Dr. Anita Joshi, a medical officer, for an outstanding contribution for managing all the emergencies during the COVID. Namrata Shinde, Library Information Assistant. Shailesh Patil from IT in absentia. And then we have Nilesh Kulkarni, Executive Engineer Civil. And for 6 months he's been working from July to December, working hard for this restoration of chemistry department. Same goes with Ganesh Pingalkar for again his contribution for the restoration of the chemistry department. And then there is a certificate of special appreciation from the director of the institute, Snehal Batule, that again for the contribution for the ERP, as I've told you earlier, for the managing the finance and accounts module. Now comes the outsourced employees who form the backbone of our institute. And to start with, Swaraj Maurya is a AC operator with the engineering. Ramlal Chaudhary, the hostel manager. Gopal Ganmode is from the housekeeping. Balaji Chavan, gardener. Vishal Sawant, gardener. Vilas Rao Jagtap, security supervisor. Manoj Sode, driver. Now I come to the list of awardees for the COVID-19 test center. We all know that during the first phase, this test center was functioning almost on a shift basis, and they have worked beyond the call of their duty. And to start with, I will announce with the faculty members. And this entire center was managed by Anjan Banerjee. And to start with, Mridula Nambiar. Krishnapal Karmodia. Sudha Rajamani. Alok Mishra, Anjum and Ashwini Kamolkar in absentia. It is Saurabh Butolia. Jayant Bide is not here. Nikita Patil. Kishan Saha. Ketaki Ghate and Dhriti Nagar in absentia. And the next is Dr. Saumen Khan. Rohan Sharma. Mano in absentia. Aniruddhi Pillai. Ashwin PK. Mr. Santosh Kadam. Dildar Sheikh. Sheetal Mahadev Rokde. Bhagwan Tukaram Vaidya. Vishnupant Lokre. And now is the list of awardees for the COVID Vaccination Center, which was established by IISER Pune. Prabhakar Angare and Sachin Pimpalkar, both of them in absentia. Thank you very much.
Now coming to the end of award ceremony, I would also like to request Registrar Sir to extend the vote of thanks.
So Professor Deepak Dhar has been an inspiration for all of us for his academic achievements. And also he has been an inspiration for all of us for his fitness regime. I think almost every day I find him running in the campus. I think he can compete with any of an undergraduate student. So we thank him for accepting our invitation and for delivering this Foundation Day lecture. I would also like to thank the academic section, the engineering and the IT for the smooth conduct of this event. And I would like to thank all the faculty members, staff and students who are here for this function. Thank you very much.